coming. So we're going to be having a chat today about drone regulation, a really hot topic, particularly for companies like mine. So in addition to Halo, I have a new company called Verifly that makes drone registration and identity verification, as well as commonly known as geofencing systems. Nick, let's talk about you. How did you get into to be a drone cop?
Well, it was a fairly short journey, actually, Jay. I was the last man that didn't step forwards. Essentially, I work in protective security in central London, so my role in life is to look after vulnerable people and vulnerable premises. I'm talking at sort of governmental level. And when I took up that role a couple of years ago, it became very obvious to me that we were seeing drones flying around London, which ostensibly were for innocent purposes, mainly tourists. But it became very obvious that they represented some risk to us in terms of, in the most basic sense, the imagery that was being captured. And so when I looked into it a bit further, realised that there really wasn't any police perspective or police position on how we were going to deal with those matters. So over the last 18 months in particular, I worked as a group of a small national cohort that's tried to bring some cohesion as to how UK policing will deal with what we see as an emerging risk, but also what we see as an emerging opportunity.
Great. Ralph, how about you? How did you get into all this?
Well, my previous incarnation in life in the military, I was responsible for that whole area, shall we say, of operations. So drones obviously are playing a bigger and bigger part there. And then earlier this year, when I changed my role into become the civil regulator, all of a sudden I had to look at drones from the opposite perspective. And I mean, on a personal level, I have a hobby of photography, so therefore I immediately can see all the pluses, all the positives that go with it. But at the same time, aviation is probably the most heavily regulated industry that we have, not without reason. People expect it to be regulated. And so we need now to find that balance between those two worlds.
So a question to both of you guys. Having worked in this industry for a while on the enforcement and regulatory side, what is the wildest thing that you have ever seen somebody do with a drone, and what did you do about it?
Well, I think, Jay, all you have to do is go on the internet, go on YouTube, put in anything you want. Drone flight over Dublin, drone flight over,
and that's illegal?
That is illegal, yeah. And you will see plenty of illegal clips that people proudly put their name to and so on. So there is obviously, it highlights that dilemma. People don't realize they're doing wrong. So if you look at the way Europe and the European Safety Agency is approaching it, it's about developing regulations. But we're trying to develop regulations for people who don't see what they're doing as aviation, so therefore are not looking for regulations, and then turning around to policemen like Nick and saying, well, actually this is bigger than just a small bunch of regulators in an aviation authority, so it's more a police matter, so you look after it. So you have people who don't see it, the need for regulation, don't see what they do as being part of aviation, being policed by people who actually have enough other things on their plate to worry too much about it.
And certainly from our perspective, that's how it's been reflected in the UK at the moment. We've got a very collaborative relationship with the Civil Aviation Authority, and it's been born out of necessity, really, which is the Civil Aviation Authority are picking up lots of examples, such as you just described there, James, and realising that they, as the aviation regulator, can't actually cope with what they actually see as toys. I see it from a slightly different perspective, because I see the more malevolent usage, and again, look on the internet and you'll pick up stories such as the eco-activist dropping radioactive material onto the Prime Minister's house in, I think, Tokyo last year. You can take that to any extent that you like. In London, I've seen small drones used to actually attack people. We have a prankster group in London that film, silly stunts, and they were flying into a shopping centre and bumping into people. And most recently, only last week, actually, we put an early intervention in where we found somebody on eBay selling a reasonably sophisticated six-bladed copter with a paintball gun attached underneath, which ostensibly is probably quite good fun if you're a paintballer, but now extrapolate that into, for example, a ceremonial event in central London, and it creates a whole new world of risk for us.
And so, how scared should we be? Are these things really a public safety risk, or is a lot of what we're hearing overblown enthusiasts that eventually will calm down with time?
Like everything, there is risk involved, and our job as regulators is to make sure that that risk is properly assessed and then is mitigated in whatever way is necessary, and the maximum number of people are protected from it. There will always be people who will misuse or abuse, but if at least you can separate those who would willingly follow your regulations from that group, then you can deal with that group in isolation.
I think society is probably the judge of where the risk sits, to be honest with you. So what we've started to see through judicial outcomes is society's got quite a low appetite for risk in relation to drones at the moment. And we've had our first 2 successful prosecutions in the UK by police. The Civil Aviation Authority had prosecuted a couple of times previously. And they resulted in probably the biggest fines I've seen in 25 years of policing.
How much was that?
£1,800.
Okay.
Which from a magistrate's court fine is very significant for a sole operator. But you can extrapolate the risks you say. Just as a personal example, I live literally in the middle of nowhere. I live in a farming community in North Oxfordshire. And I was sitting in my back garden the other day with my 3-year-old son, and of all the gardens in the world that a drone had to fly into, it was mine. And it just missed my young son's head, landed in my fish pond. I held it under for a good 10 minutes before I brought it back up. Coincidentally, the following day I was actually on the national media talking about this particular case, and about 2 days later somebody sheepishly knocked on my front door and asked for the drone back. But a minor risk probably in the big scheme of things, but nonetheless a risk if we can't be assured that devices can be controlled properly, either through operator competence or through manufacturing competence.
So what do you think the biggest risk is for a drone? There's been a lot of talk about drones not interacting with people, but interacting with aircraft, Ralph, which is really what you guys do on a regular basis, and about the ability for a drone to be sucked into a jet engine and how much damage that would cause, and a lot of close calls that have been reported just recently at Kennedy Airport in the United States, as well as Heathrow, as well as I believe in Dublin as well. Can a drone really take down an aircraft?
Well, we don't want it to happen to find out that it can happen. So it's about finding that balance and, as I say, trying to assess that risk as best you can, so putting in the safety measures around it. So obviously for us it's an absolute no-no to fly anywhere near an operating airfield, let alone a big international airfield, but where you have aircraft taking off and landing at critical phases of flight. So that is a key area for us. But again, we have always segregated airspace so that different users are kept away from each other. So we need to look at perhaps drones as another part of that segregation. And I would readily accept that we can't just keep saying, no, you can't fly here, no, you can't fly there, no, you can't fly there. Equally, aviation is going to have to work to find places where people can fly and probably identify positive fly zones for drones.
So let's talk about the regulations. So the reports are that between now and Christmas, there will be 1 million drones sold globally. That's putting the fear of God into some people, particularly in the United States, where they are trying to rush in rules to make sure that every drone needs to be registered, similar to a dog or a car. What are each of your countries doing, and what are each of your views on registration, and is it something that is necessary? Is it something that can be done seamlessly, or is it something that is going to kill the market and make this more like buying a heavily regulated item and therefore unattractive to the consumers like the ones in our audience?
I think it's a very tough position to postulate on. What we've seen in the very short time that I've been involved is a rapidly accelerating technology in terms of capability and a significantly decreasing cost. And the net result of that is that there will always be people out there that will exploit that technology. So from our position, regulation is critical to help us segregate the lawful, legitimate, sensible user from those that would seek to do harm. And certainly, any of you can search on the internet and look at what people are espousing they can do with drones. For us, that represents significant risk. And if in some way we can regulate how those drones operate in our airspace, that allows us to really focus on where the threats are. Whereas if we leave it and we just work on the principle that there's 1 million drones out there everybody's using in their own way, it becomes a very confused picture and really makes it difficult for us to separate things out. But the one thing that even with registration, will always happen is somebody will use technology for offending purposes. We see it with cars, we see it with firearms, we see it with every technology that's ever been invented. Sooner or later, somebody will exploit a way to use it for criminal purposes.
But like that drone that landed in your backyard, it presumably might have been easier to catch the person if they had that drone registered, or it wouldn't have taken 2 days.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the problem in the UK at the moment is our drone law has its genesis in traditional aviation. And traditional aviation was focused on aircraft that you can see on radar. You can measure their heights on radar. If you need to, you can look at their black box. What we're currently doing at the moment, through using this existing legislation, is asking street cops to look at a device in the air, if we can get there in time to find the pilot, for example, and assess how high it is, how far it is, by eye. We have no technology to match it. So for us, this concept of being able to technically regulate what's going on would be very useful to support whatever enforcement our government decides is required in the future.
Well, registration?
There has to be registration, because if we talk about risk and mitigating risk, you've got to know what the problem is. So for us, the first step is registration. So we need to register everybody to know what's out there, and then start to deal with it from there, and deal with the issues that fall out of it. And there's probably 3 immediate bands of risk. There is the risk to aviation, of course, and our principal role, and will always be, safety of aviation. So therefore, we're regulating to enhance safety. But the other 2 areas are security. Obviously, number 1 is big. And there's a whole new area, I suppose, of societal acceptance that is coming into play. So a lot of the complaints we actually get on a weekly basis are actually from people, ordinary people in the street, who don't like a drone flying over. So I think we're probably on the cusp of seeing how society is actually going to accept drones and drone technology. And people at the moment are uncomfortable, for want of a better phrase, are uncomfortable with drones flying over their house, that they may be invading their privacy or whatever.
We're about to start a national process of consultation with the public that goes live in probably spring next year. And we're optimistic that the results from that will inform whatever legislative position the UK government take. But I would echo Ralph's view, which is I don't think the public's quite ready for this in terms of accepting it as unregulated technology. And if the judiciary are an extension of what the public will, and the judiciary at the moment are saying we don't like it. So almost certainly the way forward on that is going to be registration and maybe not greater regulation, but clearer regulation.
Right.
No, I think, sorry, but the regulators too, I speak straight up, the regulator has got to realise that what we're not dealing with traditional aviation, we're dealing with a whole new sphere, and approach it in that way, and use the technology to deal with the registration, with controlling it, and embrace new technology. So as regulators as well, we also have to look at the powers that the very technology we're trying to regulate will bring and give us, and use that technology to make it easier and more acceptable to everybody.
Well, let's talk about that point. So, I'm a drone user. When I bought it, I really didn't conceptualize that I was buying an aircraft. I thought I was buying the newest, consumer electronics, item. And when I fly it, I didn't even think that I was necessarily flying an aircraft. And I don't have pilot training, and I have no way to read a traditional pilot's or airspace map. How do you regulate somebody that is in that position that simply doesn't know they're doing anything wrong?
The ultimate dilemma. And I won't say we've found the way forward yet, but we are still working on ways. But regulation, with the boom that is coming in Christmas, and with the word that drones are going to be the number 1 item under the Christmas trees this year, we have to move. We have to put base regulation in place, which we will have in place, requiring registration, and then we'll grow it from there as best we can.
And so with regard to solving this problem of a consumer electronics item that needs to be regulated to play well with the rest of society, and certainly the rest of the things in the air, what is the role of drone manufacturers in this? So we've talked a lot about operators and their responsibility, but there are also other examples of consumer products that have been regulated to require that they be produced to be safer, and to have things like airbags in cars, anti-lock brakes, et cetera, et cetera. Is that something that we're likely to see with drones as well?
certainly from our perspective, Jay, we would definitely encourage that being the direction of travel for manufacturers, because when you think about the principal problem, which is preventing this technology from interfacing with aviation, from interfacing with established security installations, there's a very easy way to mitigate that, which is to stop them technically coming into that environment in the first instance.
You're talking about geofencing.
Geofencing, yeah. And thereafter, there still remain threats through public crowds, ceremonial events, VIP movements, all that sort of stuff. But you've taken out a massive chunk of the problem if you can stop the technology from coming into those areas to start with.
And that's it. The more we can build in at source, the better, the safer, and the less counterswing I think you will get then from society in relation to drones.
So move, let's say, 5 years into the future when hopefully these issues have been resolved. Is there a drone on every skyline? What do you guys believe is the real future of this technology, or is it going to be in the hands of just a privileged few who have registered them and are using them with some degree of knowledge and skill?
I think you're probably looking at, maybe it's passé, but we're limited by our own imagination. Realistically, they are there, they are giving capabilities, and if we stand aside from the regulation and the risk and leave them to one side and see all the benefits that can be brought to society in general and in a lot of specific areas, I think they will continue to grow because society will adapt and adjust as mankind has done since time immemorial.
I think I would definitely agree with that. I think we are in a world of limitless opportunity with this technology. Any circumstance or environment where you need to convey equipment, visual technology to a particular location, it would appear that we're on the threshold of being able to do it cheaper and faster than we've been able to do it previously. I work for an organisation that's probably got to find £1 billion worth of cuts in the next 4 to 5 years. I can definitely see some core elements of policing being taken over by using drones. We are starting to do that already. There are national programs already exploring what we can do with the technology. And
using drones not just to fight drones, but to fight traditional crimes.
Absolutely, yeah. You can look at it from a surveillance perspective. You can look at it from just projecting your ability to look beyond your normal, if you like, two-dimensional image. I've seen some very interesting innovations around defibrillators being delivered by drones. If that stuff's true, if it's possible, I think about central London, which is chaotic at times. Being able to deliver that sort of benefit to society is a real plus.
Well, that's
in a safe and regulated environment.
In a safe and regulated environment.
And with that, thank you very much, Ralph and Nick, for taking the time to come here, and let's see what the future brings.
Excellent,
Thanks, Jay.
thank you.